Yeah, I apologize about that delay. I know you don't want to hear that echo, but yeah, Facebook hasn't been connecting the last 2 weeks for the Tuesday show. So I definitely want to make sure it's connected and part of it because a lot of the family view from Facebook and the other majority come on Twitch. So here we go. All right. Let me get my life together. So glad to be back with you for another episode of Soul Swami Live. I hope you've been having a fantastic week since the last time we were together. If this is your first time here, what we do here is discuss healing and the evolution of ourselves to become the best version of who we are. We do that through learning new information, live energy readings, discussion, questions, and activities that we do to help us conceptualize and reframe who we are and where we are and what we are worthy of. We do this every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Thursday, we have a spinoff, which is Thursday Night Book Club, in an effort to, allow us to be able to reconnect with that childlike energy in us by having someone read to us. And it is also at 7 p.m. You can catch the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and more times than not on Instagram. So you can follow and get the notifications whenever we go live so that you can get your daily bread. You know what I'm talking about? Get your feel on the good news. You know what I'm talking about? So generally we start every show off with a little bit of energy work. This week we are back on I'm tired of you early. you you usually the last one. So I appreciate you though. But we generally start every show with a little bit of energy work, and this week we are on the crown again. The crown resides right above your there you go. Right above your head in this area, which incorporates your consciousness, your spiritual connection, and your sacred knowledge, that universal knowledge that you just don't quite know how you got it, but you know you got it. If you are into color therapy, you want to think violet for your crown. So that means spend some time in violet lights. Hence, I forgot my little backlight. Wear some violet or purple clothes. Or eat some violet or purple food to help ignite the energy of your crown. If you are into aromatherapy and essential oils, you want to think frankincense, rosewood, myrrh, sandalwood, lavender are all good smells to ignite the energy of your crown, your thought processes. If you are into crystals and gemstones, you want to think selenite, amethyst, moonstone. Diamonds are more than a girl's best friend. They are very good at igniting your crown. And clear quartz is like that. That's why I got my clear quartz ring on. Boop, 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 boop. Well, it's clear quartz mixed with some other stuff, so it allows it to look a little more rainbow, but it is good for that. The next thing we do is a little bit of sound therapy where I'll hit the bowl for a little bit. Then we move into our breath work and we do some affirmations, and then we get the show on the road. So during this time, all you really have to do is just focus on shifting your energy into a space where you can participate open and honest with the show we have today and let go of the stresses of your day and start bringing in that stable, consistent energy that allows you to relax. So, relax. Next, for our breath work, we are going to do first thing that came to my mind, so I'm just going to trust it. I thought about changing it to 478, but we're going to do box breathing. If you are unfamiliar with box breathing, 444, what it is you breathe in for a 4 count, you hold your breath for a 4 count, and then you exhale for a 4 count. But all you have to do is just focus in on your breathing and your energy and clearing your thoughts, and I will guide you through the breathing exercise. So you just listen to the sound of my voice. On the count of 3, we will start with box breathing. 4, 4, 4. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Last time, family. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Next, I want you to repeat these affirmations after me. They are very good at, again, igniting the energy of your crown, clearing your thoughts, and reminding you of your value and worth in this world. Just repeat after me. I am divine. I am connected to the universe. I am at peace. I am a spiritual being. I release doubt and welcome faith. I am divine. I am connected to the universe. I am at peace. I am a spiritual being. And I release doubt and welcome faith. All right. So now we can get this show started. Here we go. switch around. Last comment still says relax. So I'm laughing at you, Toddy, over there on Twitch. So again, we're on several different sites. So follow, join, do whichever site feels most comfortable and authentic to you. But whatever you do, support your own evolution by joining in. This is your weekly reminder that you can purchase the 7 Spaces of Healing. This is a very good book to help you begin your path on the evolution of becoming the best version of yourself by being able to identify 7 spaces that are essential to your healing process. A space for love, a space for healing, a space for solitude, a space for trust, a space for risk without judgment, a space for accountability, and a space for forgiveness. You can get this book right now. It's available for your purchase on Amazon. Half man, half Amazon. All right, so then we're gonna start with a little general discussion. I was able to hang out with my college roommate this weekend, and we wound up having a conversation about one of his children, one of his babies is getting glasses now, right? And I talked to him about this idea of something I was listening to, probably NPR more than likely, looking at glasses as a disability. You know what I mean? And the sooner you address that disability, the better off for the experiences of those who have that disability, right? And how I was explained as though by the time a child or a person is diagnosed with the need of glasses, they have already been functioning in this world in a blur, right? And that blur changes the way you see things, your experiences, and all of that, right? So I was explaining that to him, and then I began to tell him about how, when I got glasses, how it changed my world, right? I really had no idea on how much I wasn't able to see until I got glasses. I didn't know red was that red. I didn't know green was that green. I talked to the brothers about it last night. One of the brothers was like, I couldn't even recognize how when he would look at a tree, it'd just look like when a child draws a tree and there's some squiggly lines, so you can see it has leaves, but with the glasses you can see that the leaves also has veins and definition, and not all just green, right? So that idea of wearing glasses can be something that change your whole perception, right? And then we also talked about how once you get them, you begin to be able to see what other things you are actually sensitive to, right? So I'm a touch sensitive person, and I really didn't have a full understanding on what that meant until I got my glasses, right? So before then, I was one of those kids that had to touch everything, right? I had to touch everything. The reason I had to touch everything is because I couldn't have see. So my hands became somewhat of an extension of my eyes by allowing me to be able to understand the world around me through touch, right? So I'd be touching everything. But touching everything allowed me to be able to see that I am sensitive to touch, right? So now with the glasses, it changed my world so much where I can look at certain things and know it's going to affect my sensitivity to touch. So I don't want to touch it, right? All of this to just wind up telling you that, one, it is okay to address your needs, right? Doing what's necessary to address your needs, overcoming the fear of being diagnosed or labeled, and doing the things that's necessary to be able to improve your needs, right? Whether it be we use vision and eyes and glasses as the example, but this whole show is about improving and addressing our needs, our physical needs, our emotional needs, our spiritual needs, and our mental needs. Our four bodies that we address when we're talking about during this show. Next thing, and this is just really more specific to me, but never mind. I won't even say that. So this week we are going to discuss ego. Right? And I look forward to that. It's going to be exciting. Last week we wrapped up our series on the 12 universal laws by discussing group 4. Group 4 was the laws that provide perspective, balance, and address life cycles. We talked about the law of relativity, which simply means that meaning depends on context, comparison, shapes our experiences, right? So everything is relative. Nothing has meaning by itself. So we have to place things within context, and the law of relativity makes us be able to understand and accept that contextual perspectives are valuable perspectives. We also talked about the science that helps support this idea of the law of relativity, which was cognitive appraisal. Simply put, how we appraise things. We give value or interpret the event through our mind, right? So that's cognitive appraisal, which lets us know that the law of relativity is good. We also talked about social comparison as a theory that supports the law of relativity. We as humans, it's just natural for us to compare ourselves to other things to be able to assess our success, our status, our adequacy, and our sense of safety. The next law that we discussed was the law of polarity. The law of polarity tells us that opposites are really two things on the same spectrum. They are not oppositional, right? They are two things on the same spectrum. So everything that we interact with, everything that we deal with in life has an opposite, because it is degrees of that opposing force or opposing energy that makes it opposite. It's the other end of the spectrum. We know light and dark, right? But when we're talking about light and dark, we're still talking about being able to see light and dark. When we talk about hot and cold, those are not opposites. They are degrees of temperature. 1 degree is hot, 1 degree is cold. Those are perfect examples of it. So this also helped us to be able to understand that we don't need to necessarily eliminate negativity. We need to shift our degree on where where we are to move from negative onto the more positive side, right? The science that we talked about it, neuroscience. We used a little conversation on neuroscience, talking about emotions are not binary. They exist in continuous dimensions, right? And then, of course, we did a couple of exercises to address where we are with the law of polarity. Next, we did the law of rhythm. And the law of rhythm helped us to understand that everything moves in cycles. We talked about specific cycles. Specific cycles that we used as a science to support us was through biorhythms, right? We talked about circadian rhythms, which are rhythms that happen frequently within a 24-hour period. We talked about circadian rhythms function on a 24-hour period. Ultradian rhythms function multiple times within a 24-hour period. And then we did infradian rhythms, which allow us to be able to understand cycles that function on longer than a 24-hour period, like seasons, or what we use, the menstruation cycle of our women. The last law we discussed was the law of gender. right? And it allowed us to be able to look at gender as energy and not identity. We moved it from that. So we understand as we learn polarity, we also understand feminine energy and masculine energy exist in each and every one of us in all things because they are an energetic force, not necessarily a identity, a sexual identity. We talked about masculine energy are things like, I gotta move this, action, focus, will, logic, direction, decision making, structure, discipline, execution. All of those are examples of masculine energetic forces, right? And then we also talked about feminine energetic forces, which were intuition, flow, reflection, creativity, nurturing, patience, emotion, connection, and receptivity. The ability to be able to receive are all examples of feminine energy that functions within each of every one of us, right? Terrence, glad to have you here, brother. We're gonna get deep in ego. So hopefully you can be able to receive something. Not like you. Hopefully everybody can be able to receive something, but I'm talking to you specifically because you my brother. You know what I mean? I hope I can give you some food today. I definitely know I got some food as I was preparing for the show to be able to, yeah, share with everyone else, right? So the main idea of the main scientific idea that we use to be able to support the law of gender was neuroscience. And in neuroscience, it says that the brain functions with complementary brain forces, right? So part of our brain will take care of certain activities, and then another part of our brain will take care of other activities. No side of our brain, like the left side of our brain, does not do all the work of our brain. The right side has functions as well. So it supports this idea of masculine and feminine energy forces through brain, excuse me, through complementary brain functions, right? And then, of course, we did some exercises to be able to assess where we are in our own growth, development, and use of the law of gender. Now, we are going to get into ego. Ego. What made me really want to talk about ego? Lately, over the last couple of weeks, it's been in my face, right? About destroying the ego, right? And it was even funny because when I was in my Reiki class, we even talked about going through the master class and separating from the ego. And we even had a story about one person in class, not in this class, but in a previous class, wound up going back into the water to get their ego, right? And at first that sounded so absurd to us. Like, you doing all this work to let go of the ego, why would you go back to it? Now that I have a better understanding of ego, it makes sense, right? So we want to move beyond this idea of destroy the ego and move into this space of integrate the ego so that we can function within a healthy ego. An ego is a necessary part of who we are, right? The ego helps us do a lot of different things. So I really wanted to move from that space of destroy the ego. You see it on social media. Everybody talking about destroy the ego as a means to enlightenment, right? But that's because they don't fully understand the ego. So what we're going to do is be able to offer a little bit of clarity and integration by understanding the ego a little better. And by understanding the ego a little bit better, we'll be able to identify where we are functioning, what ego we are functioning other, and we'll be able to recognize that in the relationships that we interact with. Those with work, those with general publics, platonic, loved ones, any type of relationship you think about. All of us as humans will function under the ego because, again, it's a necessary part of who we are. So, what is the ego? What is the ego? The ego is the I, right? That is the part of you that experiences yourself as a separate individual, right? So what does that mean? I mean, the example I can think about is I've been talking to the brothers and anybody with ears who can listen to it about my journey into sobriety, right? Not like sobriety in the sense that I'm doing activities and things that I would normally do that involve drinking, like going out to the club, going out to hang with my friends, going out to eat, going on dates, just those simple things included alcohol, right? So now, as I'm experiencing these same things without that tool or without alcohol, it is like myself watching myself on a movie. I can feel a certain level of detachment and I can feel a certain level of inquisitiveness that allows me to be able to see what's actually happening and then see from outside of myself what's going on. So the ego is like that idea. It's like watching yourself in real life action. Is the I, it's the part of yourself that sees you as a separate individual, right? As we discuss the ego, we will look at the ego in two main ways. We will look at ego as function based, and function based simply be the way that we generally look at ego based on Sigmund Freud and some of his conversations. And then we will also look at ego as identity based, and identity based will be more of the spiritual aspect of ego, so we can understand how we are functioning physically in the ego and spiritually in the ego, right? So those are the two ways. Function based and identity based is how we will look at the ego. So function based ego, we'll start there. This function-based ego, the idea of function-based ego, stemmed from the research of Sigmund Freud. Many of us have heard about Sigmund Freud. We understand Freud talks about the ego, but the way that we interact and the way that we understand ego shows that we need a little more information to be able to fully understand what ego is. So Freud explains that ego is the rational organization part of the mind. It operates on the reality principle. The reality principle simply means is the ego is functioning on what is happening to you right now, what is really happening in this moment, or even when you can anticipate what will happen, but it's going to be based on real cause and effect, real tangible thing, not necessarily always tangible, but real cause and effect things, right? The ego generally functions between three different levels, right? We know the ego to be the id. The id part of our ego, the id part of our ego is simply our instincts and our impulses, right? The other part of our ego is the super ego, right? So the super ego is our morals and our ideals. And all of these are based on the external reality that we are living and experiencing, right? So what does this mean? What it means is the ego helps us to plan, decide, remember, evaluate, and function within the world. It is like I used to watch this show called Dexter. And Dexter used to always say this thing. Dexter was a serial unaliver, right? Who worked for the police department, which made it even better. But he used to always refer to his need to unalive people as his silent passenger. So the ego is somewhat like our silent passenger. It is there to help us decide, remember, evaluate, and function in the world, right? It also says to us what this also means is given reality, given what's happening, what's the best way? What's the best thing to do or the best way to handle this? The ego is what helps you navigate through those waters, right? By definition, the ego is not selfish. And many times when we talk about the ego, we talk about the ego as a selfish thing. But by definition, the ego is not selfish at all, right? It is necessary for healthy functioning, right? It is not selfish. It is healthy. It is necessary. Ego problems wind up arising when we are functioning within, one of the other egos, right? So ego problems rise when we're functioning in a weak ego, a rigid ego, or over defensive ego, right? Anything outside of functioning within a healthy ego is where ego problems arrive. Ego problems internally and externally within the relationships that we have with people. We want to make sure that we're considering ego internally and externally, right? So, how does the ego function? First, the ego functions through reality testing. What is reality testing? Right? The ego, accurately, a healthy ego, or ego, simply put, accurately distinguish internal thoughts and feelings from external reality. Right? So the ego helps us separate how we feel versus what is actually happening. So the ego is that thing that makes you say, are they attacking me? Or is that just how I feel? Right? So the ego, as a matter of fact, one of the things I wrote down, one of the ways that you can tell that we may not be functioning in a healthy ego is a statement. If you ever heard this statement, I feel like, right? Because a healthy ego will help us to be able to separate our feelings from what's really happening, right? Because feelings are emotion. Well, no, scratch. Emotions are real. Feelings are the stories that we tell ourselves about those emotions. So those feelings can be real or fabricated. Even though they feel intense and they feel real, they may just be like that because of the stories we are telling ourselves, right? But a healthy ego will go through reality testing by helping you to be able to separate your feelings, the stories you tell yourself, from what is actually happening to you, what is going on in your life right now, right? Next thing, a healthy ego can accept feedback, limits, and facts without distortion. Yeah, definitely. We are talking about healthy ego too. Healthy ego can accept feedback, limits, and facts without distortion. What does that mean? We generally talk about this. The perfect example of this is cognitive dissonance. Those people or those situations, when they're presented with facts, they still fall back on their feelings, right? You can tell them that's not really happening. Only 5% of people ever did this. Be like, well, I feel like, or in my experiences, they allow their feelings and experiences to supersede reality, the facts of what's really happening, right? A healthy ego does not need to rewrite reality to feel safe, right? So if you're using language like I feel, or if you're just denying other possibilities, that is a sign that you may not be functioning within a healthy ego, because a healthy ego does not need to rewrite reality to feel safe. That's like this idea of there's three sides to every story. The reason why there's three sides to every story, because there's really only one truth. The reason why there's three sides to every story is because the ego comes in play. And some people are rewriting the story that takes it a little bit from the truth. So that'll be is my version, their version, and then somewhere in there is the actual truth, right? But that shows I'm functioning outside of a healthy ego because I am rewriting the reality that is happening to me, right? An example of that is an example of healthy ego would be something like, I feel criticized, but I can check to see if that's actually what happened. I'm angry, but I can pause to see if that anger is warranted. Something I forgot, I skipped over it too, is the types of egos we're going to discuss. So we're going to discuss healthy ego, which we were just running through. We're going to discuss inflated ego. And we're going to discuss fragile or wounded ego. And then we're also going to discuss weak ego over the next couple of weeks, right? So healthy ego, give you a little description of what a healthy ego is. A healthy ego can tolerate reality. It can tolerate reality. A healthy ego can regulate emotions and remain intact, right? In the presence of stress, failure, and difference without needing to distort, dominate, or disappear. Let me say that again. A healthy ego can tolerate reality tolerate reality, regulate emotions, and remain intact in the presence of stress, failure, and difference, right? Without needing to distort, dominate, or disappear. Opt out of the game, right? So when we go back to looking at a healthy ego can also, it functions with it helps with emotional regulation. As we said, emotional regulation, right? What does that mean? That means you can experience strong emotions without being overwhelmed or acting impulsively, right? That means you can feel strong anger, strong frustration, strong love. All of those are good examples of where the ego will show up quickly, right? And feel these things without acting impulsively, right? Without feeling like you have to respond now. Now's the time. Do it now. Now. They need to know now. I need to say now. Or even if you take a little bit of time and still stuck in that space where you still feel offended or overly excited, right? So in this emotional regulation, in emotional regulation, a healthy ego does not either suppress nor explode. So a healthy ego allows you to travel smoothly through the emotions without feeling like you need to suppress these emotions or explode and defend these emotions, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? A healthy ego in emotional regulation uses reflection rather than reaction, right? That is the example that I gave. Like, I'm angry, but I can pause and choose how to react in a different way, a healthy way, one that exemplifies the healthy version of myself, right? And honestly, that is one area I still kind of struggle with, right? In this use of reflection rather than reaction. I will get stuck in conversations with my ego, asking my ego, like, am I really being realistic by thinking about this, or do I need to do something now? Right? I really had to take some time and give myself permission to be able to process my emotions. Allow my ego to help me process my emotions, right? And one of the reasons it was hard for me is because that my relationship responsibility, I always felt like it deserves a response. I'm learning now that there's responsibility and accountability. Response requires a response. Responsibility requires a response. Accountability just requires you to be able to identify, right? So that is one space that I still am reshaping and evolving as it relates to a healthy ego without feeling the need to react. Good, bad, or indifferent. I listen, I react. When we think about reaction, we always think about our negative reactions. But sometimes reactions are good reactions. You know what I mean? But it still may be impulsive, right? Regardless of the intent. A healthy ego is flexible in its use of defensive mechanisms, right? So, what does that mean? A healthy ego uses mature defense mechanisms like humor, de-escalation, and a healthy ego anticipates. It is proactive. Those are useful and healthy defense mechanisms, right? And this was one of the areas where it was kind of eye-opening for me, right? Because I almost was aligning humor to avoidance, right? Now, humor can be used to avoid tough conversations, but when I really think about the ways that I use humor, it's really to de-escalate, to break down the walls, the barriers, the tension. I will be the first person that tells a joke. As a matter of fact, I still say I'm the kind of guy that laughs at a funeral. Funerals are tense. So if I can tell a joke to bring down those tensions, then I'll do that, right? And that is me being able to understand that humor isn't just avoidance, right? That was my main tool to de-escalate. Use humor. I'm going to tell a joke. I'm going to tell a funny story. I'm going to do something funny to the point where sometimes people see me, they'll be like, he's funny. Do something funny. And I'll be like, man, I'm not no court gesture. You can't just clap your hands and then I start telling funny jokes. That's not how it works, right? It's a tool that I use to break down barriers and build connection, right? Not to avoid, right? In this flexible use of defense mechanism, a healthy ego doesn't rely on rigidity or denial, projection or repression, right? So a healthy ego is flexible. And as much as we try to say stand on business, some of that stand on business is coming from an unhealthy ego. We are not functioning in a healthy ego because a healthy ego is flexible, especially as new information, a new understanding, or new feelings come into play, right? A healthy ego doesn't rely on denial. We don't have to pretend like that didn't happen. We don't have to act like what we felt wasn't real. We don't have to act like what they felt in that same situation was not real. It does not depend on denial, right? It it does not depend on projection. Projection shows up wild. It shows up wild. Perfect example. I had a disagreement with one of my close friends that I've had for a long time, right? And in there, they came to apologize. And now that I'm understanding ego a little better, I understand their apology came from projection. They apologized to me for the way they felt about themselves. I'll never forget. They said to me, I'm sorry for always letting you down. Hey, I didn't say that about you. That's not my problem. I don't feel that about you, right? But that was an example of projection. A healthy ego does not need to do that. If you feel negative about yourself, you don't project those thoughts on other people, right? And it does not force you to repress. One of the ways that we see repression a lot is sadness. So many people are afraid of that emotion, sadness, that they'll get stuck there, that they repress it. They don't allow themselves the space to be able to cry. So then when I wind up doing Reiki sessions, people spend a lot of time crying. Those tears come from repressed emotions. This is where those ideas are coming from, that we need to destroy the ego because we feel like the ego is repressing the emotions, and it is. But that is a sign that we are not functioning within a healthy ego, because we are repressing real emotions that are a part of everyday life. Right? A healthy ego, in its flexible use of defense mechanisms, also understands when to lower the defense mechanisms because they are no longer needed, right? When is it okay to not be on guard because that is no longer needed, right? That really made me think about times where, I don't know if you've ever dealt with somebody, I'm even questioning this about some people now, where they feel hurt, and you understand they feel hurt. But because they're functioning in an unhealthy ego, in their process of forgiveness or forgiving, it includes them having you around so that they can treat you in ways so that you can understand that they are hurt, right? That is them not functioning within a healthy ego, because they cannot recognize when peace has entered the building, when forgiveness is the foundation that's being laid, because they still feel like you need to understand how they felt, right? A healthy ego helps us have a stable sense of self. A stable sense of self. What does that mean? It means a healthy ego maintains coherent sense of self across success, failures, praise, and or criticism. Regardless of what is happening to you, you still have a healthy sense of self. You don't internalize everything as a reflection of who you are. We don't hold our experiences in so high regard that they become the sole descriptor of our identity. A healthy ego helps us have a stable sense of self through success, failure, praise, and criticism, right? And in a moment of honesty and transparency and vulnerability with the family, that is an area that I have to be honest that I am still growing in, because I have a tendency to internalize, or for lack of better words, just kind of get stuck on my failures, right? And I brush off successes. It's wild. People have been pointing out successful ways to me that lately that normally, if you ask me, I would not think about it like this, right? So in my work environment, I've been doing a lot of winning. Games, guesses, no lie. It's just wild. I talked about when I was in San Diego. This lady asked us what percentage of women do we think are committing fraud in nonprofits. It's very specific because it was a training about fraud. So it's not an attack on women. She was just asked, it was a woman asking us what we think, right? And I just said 37. I did some quick calculations in my mind. I said 37%, right? And nobody else guessed it. And then all of a sudden she says, did anyone say 37%? I had that number right and exact. I have a coworker, that's my coworker friend, and she'll say to me, "Man, you always winning. I got a new buddy where I'm going to help them get acclimated to doing what we do, serving clients and technical assistance, training the technical assistants." And one of the things I told my supervisor was, I'm going to teach them how to continuously win. And that was a big statement because that was reflective of me shifting my identity and me moving more into a healthy ego. Because now I can accept failures and success and still feel the same, still have a good self identity, a good sense of self as I travel or navigate through these very different experiences and emotions, right? In that stable sense of self, self-worth with a healthy ego is not dependent on constant validation or superiority. In this context, when we think about validation, because a lot of times many of us cannot recognize that we are seeking validation because we confuse validation for approval, right? And not everybody is seeking approvals. So when we talk about people and they're posting pictures of themselves all the time and we're like, oh, they're seeking validation, they can easily say, no, I don't need the approval of anyone. But approval and validation are very two different things, right? When we look at validation, we want to think about validation in terms where it makes you feel better about your insecurity. Social media is really about validation because most people don't show both sides of the coin. You either have somebody on social media that's just stuck in negativity or somebody that's just showing the greatness of their lives and not some of the things they struggle with that we all struggle with. So validation in these terms are things to make us feel better about our insecurities, right? And it's wild because when I was talking to my homeboy this weekend, I told him two things. As I date, two things that one thing that I'm not flexible on really, or I don't want to be flexible on, is I don't want the decision for our family to be made without us being a family, right? Some people will make the decision for their lives. Like, this is what my life is going to be. But that life does not include the family that they do want. Because what if your mate wants something different? Or what if what you want for yourself is not what's best for that child, right? I talked about it in terms of thinking about only child, right? Many of us would be like, I'm not having any more children, one and done. But that is not functioning within a healthy ego, because a healthy ego is not selfish. And when we look at children, it would be very hard pressed to not say that siblings are beneficial to a child. So that's how and then the second thing that I told him that I needed is I cannot be in a relationship where I'm there to make you feel better about your insecurities or mask your insecurities, right? We can pull them up, we can address them, we can work on them. All those things can be understanding, but I'm not in a space to just function in a way to make you feel better about your insecurities, to give you validation, right? Then when we look at superiority in this context, we want to look at it like the example I wrote down is something that we've heard on dating a lot, where it says, get you somebody that likes you more than you like them. That is moving from a space of superiority. Why wouldn't you want to be in a space or in a relationship where you both like each other equally? If you like them a lot, they like you a lot. Why would you feel safer in a relationship that you don't like a person as much as they like you? Right? You have to question yourself. Why would you be in that relationship? What are your real motives for being connected or functioning like that? Because we just identified how that is functioning, not in a healthy sense of ego, right? A healthy ego has the capacity for ambivalence. What that means is a healthy ego can hold conflicting emotions. They can hold love and anger. They can hold confidence and doubt, right? When I think about love and anger, I'll never forget, this is a real life story. I was dating this girl during the pandemic, right? And we wound up I made some banana pudding. My banana pudding is the bomb. It's the best. That and my sweet potato pie, the best, right? And I remember I told her I was going to give her some banana pudding. And we wound up having an argument, right? And in that argument, she was going to leave. And before she left, I was like, hold on. Let me give you this banana pudding. And she says to me, how are you mad and still trying to take care of me and be considerate of me? Because I was functioning in a healthy ego. A healthy ego can hold two conflicting emotions, love and anger. I can be angry at someone and still love them. This is one of the reasons why when I'm having one of those difficult discussions with a mate, I start off with, this is not about you. I love you and I want to be with you. That's the foundation. We need to work on these walls, right? When I thought about confidence and doubt, one of the first things that came to my mind was my first Mosaic show. Listen, Mosaic was a modeling troupe that I was in when I was in college, right? And I remember doing my first show. Listen, we had practiced so much that I was confident that I knew what to do. But even within that confidence, I had a little bit of doubt and I was super nervous that Woody would come off. I was so nervous that I remember in the first scene I played a tree and my knees and legs was shaking like leaves. I had no idea that I could shake. I have never been that level of nervous where you can see my body trembling because of the nervousness. But I knew, because we put in the work, that it was going to be great. So a healthy ego has the capacity for ambivalence, the ability to hold two conflicting emotions, right? It doesn't need to split people or experiences into all good or bad. We've been talking about that a lot on the show. It's neutral. We assign it as good and bad based on our cognitive appraisal, right? So a healthy ego does not need to divide people or experiences either as a good experience or bad experiences, right? It allows us to judge the action and not the person. In that capacity for ambivalence, that healthy ego accepts the complexity in self and others, right? This is one we've been having this conversation a lot lately, because with me and the brothers, there's a couple of Pisces, we got some Geminis, but those are the perfect examples of that because they have twins, right? It's two of them. As a Pisces, I say that I'm 1 foot in the dark, one fish going downstream, and 1 foot in the light, one fish going upstream. So I can be a great person, but I also can be a not so great person. That's the complex nature of humans. I remember when I went to my father's funeral, right? I had to hit that wall, face to face, because nobody in there knew the man I knew. They all knew this great side of him, which I got to see, so I knew that. But they had no idea about the dark side of him. So I had to face the complexity of my own relationship with my father and the complexity of people outside of me, because they can be good and bad. The propensity for both resides in us. The propensity, excuse me, for both resides in us, right? A healthy ego is able to adapt and has resilience. Doesn't fold under pressure. That means it can adjust to goals, expectations, strategies when circumstances change, as new information comes. When you need to adjust, right? I was gonna wear shorts. Then I find out it's gonna be 62 degrees. I can adjust. I was gonna go out this weekend. I was gonna stay home, but I wound up going out, right? As circumstances change, a healthy ego can adapt, right? It also recovers from setbacks without prolonged disorganization, right? So that healthy ego is what helps you move from that space of sadness that so many of us want to avoid, right? Because it recovers from setbacks without leaving you stuck. Having confidence that you have a healthy ego means that you know that you can feel these emotions, but you won't get stuck there, right? You won't be there for years. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the people who will be like, I haven't dated for 15 years. And on the surface, or how they have rewritten reality, that sounds good to them. But what that sounds like to me is they're stuck. They're not even an active participant in their own lives. And a healthy ego recovers from setbacks without prolonged disorganization. It also, in its adaptation and resilience, it also sees challenges as workable and they're not catastrophic, right? So that means when we face problems or problems arise, we don't feel like these problems are going to break us down, or we don't feel like these problems are the definition of who we are, right? We see these problems as challenges that we can work through. Problems that we can solve. Not that they are going to destroy us. Like when we get stuck on that, well, one more thing, when it rains, it pours. That is catastrophic thinking that so many of us have incorporated into our daily routine that we don't even know that we're feeding ourselves poison with our own thought processes. A healthy ego, in its adaptation and its resilience, will see a challenge as workable and not one that will destroy us. We can solve these problems. All right, so we had time. We gonna do inflated ego next, right? Now, as I was studying and preparing for the show, and as I'm reading the information and digesting the information, man, this information has really allowed me to, or helped me to be able to see relationships differently. I can begin to see, at least, even if I can't necessarily label what ego they're functioning in, I can tell that they're not, necessarily functioning in a healthy ego. And now when I interact with people, or I look at these people, or these interactions that I had, I can see, right? And then by being able to see that, it helps me to also recognize how I've been interacting with very familiar dynamics. I was used to people functioning in an unhealthy ego. So that felt familiar to us, right? And we talked about how we confuse the familiar with safe all the time. So unconsciously, I would pick relationships, people, and experiences that mimic previous unhealthy ego actions because they were familiar to me, right? Next is inflated ego. We just talked about healthy ego, which is the main point, is where we're trying to get to. But now we need to be able to identify some of the other egos, right? What if I'm not functioning in a healthy ego? What am I functioning in? The next one is inflated ego. An inflated ego is simply the overestimation of your importance, power, or competence. Often, most of the time, it's a defensive response to an underlining insecurity, shame, or vulnerability, right? Many of us wind up using that inflated ego as a tool to protect ourselves from feeling shame, from feeling insecure about something, or being vulnerable, right? It is the ego, an inflated ego is the ego trying to protect itself from anxiety by becoming an exaggeration of self, right? Like perfect it was this show that used to come on TV called Pros versus Joes, right? And these Joes would be somebody fresh off the couch. They probably just got finished watching Zaboomer Food with their kids and eating popcorn and cookies and ice cream, fresh off the couch, going against a pro athlete who works out every day, right? And they would tell themselves, I can do it. That is their ego protecting themselves from the anxiety they felt that maybe they're not necessarily in the best shape that they need to. That's a perfect example. So how does the inflated ego function? Inflated ego functions with grandiosity. And grandiosity, simply put, is that distorted view of self, right? It's an exaggerated sense of ability, intelligence, or importance. Some people, like, okay, so when we was in school helped us categorize who was intelligent, right? But now that we're out of school, everybody thinks that they're intelligent, right? Some of us are functioning within an inflated ego, right? Because we have an exaggerated sense of self, ability, intelligence, or importance. They will not be able to get on without me. You will never find another one like me. All of those are inflated ego statements. So if you've ever said or thought you were not functioning in a healthy ego, you are functioning in an inflated ego. If you ever thought that they would never find another person like you, pause and really ask yourself, where is that coming from? Is that a healthy ego response? Because they will Find someone. There is no one like you, but there is someone that functions in the same, in very similar ways as you, right? In that grandiosity, it is the belief that one is exceptional or superior above ordinary limits. Thinking you the fastest person. Or like I said, those Joes, those average Joes, thinking they can beat pros, right? It also is grandiosity is also the dismissal of other perspectives and contributions, right? It is like that example that we talked about, cognitive dissonance. That's an inflated ego that you feel as though your feelings outweigh actual facts. Inflated ego is when you think that your experiences outweigh actual facts, right? An inflated ego has a defensive function. It protects. It compensates for something that is fragile inside of us. It compensates, it masks our feelings of shame. It masks our fear of inadequacy. It masks our fear of dependence. Like that idea of I don't need anyone or I don't need this because I can do it by myself. Or like I use the people who I haven't dated in 15 years. And I'm still doing all right. I'm protecting my peace. That's that's an inflated ego because it is protecting them from that fear of dependency or fear of making that mistake again, right? Inflated ego protects us from our fear of loss of control. Everyone wants to have a sense of control in our lives. There's something that we can do, say, or feel that will change the tides, right? And that inflated ego shows up to help us grab a sense of control over things that we cannot control, right? Inflated ego has poor reality testing. It's difficult. An inflated ego has difficulty being able to accept feedback or limits. There's no need to do all that at one time. Take it one at a time. Now I can do it all. Inflated ego shows up with multitasking. At one point, they told us that multitasking was a good thing. They were teaching us to function within an inflated ego, right? So inflated ego has poor reality testing, difficulty in accepting feedback or limits. An inflated ego experiences criticism as a personal attack. That's where you hear that idea like, so what you saying is, no, that's not what I'm saying. Your inflated sense of self, your inflated ego is changing what I'm saying to fit what you need it to fit, right? That's where that come in. It takes criticism as a personal attack, right? They think you're attacking their character. One of the reasons, like I used that example about my friend apologizing to me for what they feel about themselves. I was just upset that they ain't read my book, right? And I asked them to. And in over a month, they ain't read my book. So I just wanted to talk about you not reading my book. They start apologizing for, I'm sorry I always let you down. Who said that? That's how you feel about yourself. So me coming to them with a problem about reading my book wound up being a personal attack on who they are, our character, right? In that poor reality testing, an inflated ego has the tendency to reinterpret reality to preserve self-image. That is that idea of making themselves the victim. Now, even though I did wrong and they are responding to the wrong I did, I'm still the victim in this story. Not being able to accept that I victimized someone else and they are responding to what I did to them. Somehow I still become the victim. Right? Like if I slap somebody and they punch me and I be like, what you punch me for? I'm the victim. That's an inflated sense of self. I ignore the fact that I slapped them first. I initiated that, right? Or even in smaller, where you go to somebody and you want to have a conversation about what has happened, and they turn in, next thing you know, instead of you addressing your issues and your feelings, you got to stop to address theirs because they became the victim in your story. Right? So that inflated ego has a tendency to reinterpret reality to preserve their self-image, how they look at themselves. An inflated ego is rigid in its use of defensive mechanisms. Again, like I said, it may not be a red flag, but it's definitely a yellow flag. Proceed with caution that I stand on business. That statement a lot of times is rigid and could be. You got to do some self-evaluation to be honest and vulnerable. A sign that you are functioning with an inflated ego, right? It's rigid in its use of defensive mechanisms. It does that through denial. That's not true. Or not accepting accountability. You go to tell somebody that this happened, this is how they made you feel, and they be like, oh, that's not true. That's not what happened. No, that's your inflated ego showing up, not being able to set that. That's denial, right? It shows up as projection. They was just jealous. Why? Or, like the example I gave with the apology, that projection showed up as I thought about them the way they think about them. I don't think about you the way you think about you. I think about you very differently. As a matter of fact, I see you in higher regard than you see yourself, which makes it even more difficult. For people don't see themselves in high regard and you trying to see them in high regard, that inflated ego will show up and they will automatically project on you whatever they think about themselves. It shows up through rationalization. That rigid use of defense mechanism shows up through rationalization. That's that idea of, well, if this didn't happen, then I wouldn't have. That's a sign of you rationalize. That's a sign of you giving your power, your authority away, your responsibility and accountability away. Right? That's the rationalization. So if you ever heard or said, that could be a sign that you're functioning in an inflated ego because you're rationalizing your behaviors as though you have no control over them. Well, if they didn't do this, then I wouldn't have did that. Or if this didn't happen, then I wouldn't have did that. No, you chose to do that because there are always a multitude of other options. You just didn't take the time to see them, and your inflated ego showed up to protect you. So now you are rationalizing your questionable behaviors so that you don't feel shame, so that you can preserve your image of self, whatever that might be. That rigid use of defense mechanism shows up in the devaluation of others. We really see this in these conversations about cut off. Some people are proud of their cutoff game, right? And in a lot of times, that is an inflated sense of ego, an inflated ego, right? Because you have devalued people and relationships, right? So I talked about recently with one of my friends about forgiveness, right? And I used my homeboy Ali that I was friends with. We had a disagreement and we ain't talked for a year, right? But I knew we'd wind up talking again, and he'd say the same thing because we valued the relationship. The foundation of our relationship was built on love. We valued the relationship, so we knew at some point, because we valued the relationship, we valued the person, that we will take steps to heal the disconnection, bridge the gap between us, right? That the rigid use of defense mechanism shows up with dependence on external validation, needs admiration or recognition to feel stable. We talked about that, and we use social media as a perfect example, right? Two other examples that I wrote down is I was having a conversation about that dating and the process of getting to know someone. And this person was telling me, well, that happened because they heavily pursued me. And that just kind of just didn't sit right with me, right? Because that heavily pursued is dependent on external value, on external validation. You needed them to heavily pursue you for you to feel good, or for you to be able to be like, I can make this decision, for you to be able to deny the way you feel about yourself. You need a chase. I wrote down, we deal with this. As a matter of fact, I keep thinking these BBS is killing y'all. That is an example of that, right? And although people generally don't acknowledge that that is for external validation, we justify that, we rationalize it, we use all those things, devalue other relationships. I don't do this for them, I do this for me. Devalue. We rationalize as well. If I this happened, I wouldn't. We rationalize and we devalue. To do work on ourselves. But that work is for validation, external validation. Because we have internalized external thoughts about ourselves that we think we need to do this to get a different validation. It's like we have in some cultures, they do bleaching their skin, which is a real thing. The only reason why they feel the need to bleach their skin is because they have internalized external things that they want to be able to have some validation for that. So for me to be validated as a human worth value, I need to be lighter. Or the opposite is true. I've dated or met people who were fair skinned, and they dated me or wanted me because I was dark skinned. Because they had to internalize what fair skinned meant, that they didn't want anybody else. They needed validation for their children by having a darker complexion, right? That idea of I deserve something comes from this need for external validation. You feel like you deserve because you need that to feel validated for whatever you are dealing with. That deserve winds up being validation. If you say, I deserve love, I deserve a new car, I deserve this, that is external validation, right? That statement is a sign that you could be functioning within a inflated ego. That's how we recognize that, right? That dependency on external validation also shows up as highly sensitive to status threats, which is something that challenges their inflated view of themselves. A status threat, right? Highly sensitive. That's where that thing where I was just saying earlier. Well, what you saying is, or what you mean is, they are highly sensitive to something that seems like a status threat. If I see myself as a good parent and my child comes to me and says I did something to them that wasn't so good, and I take that as a personal attack, that they're saying that I wasn't a good parent, they're not. That is your inflated ego making you highly sensitive to anything that will challenge the idea that you have of self. I think I'm good. I remember when I was in college, I thought I was good. And I had a friend tell me, Peanut, one day you gonna be a good man, but you ain't no good man yet. And I cussed them smooth out. I was functioning within an inflated ego. That statement felt like a status threat, my idea of a good man. And they said, even though they said I will get there, I couldn't see that because it felt like a direct attack on who I was, right? Which is not true. But that is how an inflated ego functions, right? So, family, we are at the end of this episode. One pen there. We were able to review our wrap up of the 12 universal laws. We were able to discuss what a healthy ego is. That healthy ego can tolerate reality, regulate emotions, and remain intact in the presence of stress, failure, and difference without needing to distort, dominate, or disappear. That's a healthy ego. And we started our discussion where we were able to also talk about inflated ego, which is simply the overestimation of importance, power, competence, and often is a defensive response to underlying insecurity, shame, or vulnerability. Inflated ego protects. Next week, we'll talk about wounded ego. And this is important because a wounded ego, inflated ego, its main thing that is protecting is a wounded ego. So now we have something to be able to compare healthy ego and ask ourselves, am I functioning in a healthy ego? Now that we talked about inflated ego, it's not just words that we use. We can pose this question to ourselves. When do I function in an inflated ego? because now we know what it is. And next week we will do wounded ego, weak ego, and we'll start to I want to spend a little time going into ego defense mechanisms, right? Even though we've talked about how inflated ego is a defense mechanism, but there are other ego defenses. There are other egos that are defensive other than the 4 or 5 main ones. And if we have time, we'll start discussing spiritual definitions of ego, right? Because again, we're looking at ego as identity and function. We're starting with function, and then we'll move into identity ego. That will be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. If you got some time, join us Thursday for book club. Again, it was an opportunity for us to be able to reconnect with the childlike energy in us by allowing someone to read to us. All right. We read books that the family pick, and we enjoy those books as a family, right? If you missed the episode and you want to see, you can catch the full recording on Facebook for a little while. But YouTube has every video that we've ever done, so you can go back the last couple of years. Or you can catch the recording on Twitch, right? So you can get your feel of the good news. Before we go, I want to remind you that you are divine. You are connected to the universe and everything around you. You are at peace. You are a spiritual being. And you can release that doubt and welcome faith. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate you showing up where you can be anywhere else during this time, but you chose to be here with the family, learning, growing, and evolving. And for that, I thank you. Plenty of gratitude, right? So catch us Thursday. And if you can't be here Thursday, I hope to see you back here next Tuesday as we just continue our discussion on ego, beyond the ego. Don't destroy, integrate. Thanks again. And peace, family.